Welcome to Our Drummers Musicians. I'm your host, Luke Singleton. Join us as we explore what it truly means to be a musician and speak to the diverse talents that make music in our city and beyond. Normally recorded on a cozy couch in Brunswick, today we are recording in the home of our very special guest, the legendary guitarist Brett Garsed. Brett Garsed is an Australian musician and songwriter, best known for his face-melting guitar solos and work with Australian legend John Farnham and American artists Nelson and TJ Hammerich. Brett was featured in Guitar Player magazine's Spotlight column at an early age and went on to join John Farnham in his album Whispering Jack, which became one of the biggest selling albums in Australian history. Brett toured nationally and internationally with Farnham before moving to LA and joining US band Nelson, contributing to their album After the Rain, which went multi-platinum, selling over 3 million copies. In early 1990, Brett also recorded Centrifugal Funk with the Mark Varney label Legato Records, an intense guitar album featuring Frank Gambale and Sean Lane. After 14 years in LA, Brett returned to Australia for more tours with Farnham, where he's continued to live in a place outside of Melbourne. Brett has released 2 solo albums, Big Sky and Dark Matter, and continues to have a worldwide impact on the music scene with his iconic style, long discography, and regular guest appearances. Brett also started 2024 by launching a new guitar technique book called Hybrid Picking, a progressive and musical method to developing every finger. Join us as we explore Brett's journey through music, his experiences across the decades, and the development and continued evolution of his hybrid picking technique. We want to take a moment to acknowledge the Dja Dja Wurrung people as the traditional custodians of the land on which this podcast was recorded today. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present. Welcome to the podcast, Brett.
Thanks for having me, Luke. Pleasure.
It's so nice to meet you in this context because I should explain that my early teenage years were spent with my dad taking me to Spencer's Live to see you play with Damage.
Oh, man.
And it was like, well, we went to quite a lot of the gigs, but it was, one of the first times that I was seeing live music in that context.
Right.
And I still remember like Dad being like, look at his fingers there on the guitar. And, it was just like mind-blowing for a teenager to, see you guys playing live. These things that, in the jazz fusion world that was played a lot in my house growing up, but like it was actually happening in Melbourne and I was watching it live and you guys were just so incredible with, Jerry and Phil and Craig Newman on bass too, but your guitar playing stuck with me all these years. So thanks so much for being happy to, have a chat about it.
Oh, man, thanks for coming to the gigs. I mean, I remember those very fondly with joy and terror. They were hard for me. Phil's songs are so good. I mean, he's such a great composer and musician. I mean, off the charts. So, yeah, they were very, very challenging, but thoroughly enjoyable. On the nights when I felt comfortable,
yep,
and I'd had chance to prepare, they were so enjoyable, and I really miss them. That was such a great venue too, Spencer's. What a great place! I don't know what it is now. It's probably apartments by now or something.
Probably. What was the vibe like with that band? Did everybody just sort of like bring in a couple of tunes each? And I don't know, like Phil probably had the most tunes of his played?
It was mainly, we were only playing my songs and Phil's songs with a couple of covers. We do a couple of cover tunes. Used to do Hymn of the Seventh Galaxy, which Phil suggested, and a weird version of Miss You by the Stones that I used to play when I was in the States.
That's right.
And but we sort of split it up between my songs and Phil's songs. I preferred playing Phil's songs because mine sounded so rock next to his. Like his music is really beautifully composed jazz fusion, I would say. Mm-hmm. And I certainly don't mean that it doesn't rock. It's got an edge to it, but Phil's music goes so deep. Mine sounded quite simple, I felt, next to his. But a lot of people said they liked the contrast. They liked the contrast of my music and his side by side. So yeah, that was just how we did it.
That's great. Well, I you've done quite a lot of interviews talking about all your different like playing and different experience, and I won't say no to some storytelling too. But I'm like super interested in what was happening in your world before you joined, Farnham and sent your tape to Spotlight to develop all of your technique and chops, I guess, but mostly as like a self-taught guitarist without, a teacher for 10 years or, gigging with like a large series of bands building up to that. You sort of went from, I don't know, teaching yourself for a decade at home and then, suddenly just burst forth into the world as this amazingly skilled shredder that was featured and then put straight into Farnham's biggest album.
Well, there is a lineage to it. I mean, the fact that we're sitting here in Campbell's Creek, which is about 10 kilometres from Castlemaine, and I actually grew up 15 kilometres the other direction towards Dalesford on a stretch of ground called Clydesdale, and there's no pub or post office. It's just got a postcode and that sort of thing. But we just lived on a farm. My family lived on a farm. But I was just really lucky. My father passed away when I was very young. I was about 6, and my brother was 16. So he took over the family farm, but he was also a guitar player. He had a guitar. I do have a very early memory of him playing in a band when we used to live in Geelong. I couldn't have been any more than about 4, but the memory's there.
Wow.
And it was that guitar hanging on the wall there, that Maton, the red one. Oh, it's a Maxim by Maton, whatever that is.
Okay.
And I think I've even told Neville and Linda at Maton about it, and they don't even remember it. I suppose it was something we made at some stage. And but of course, my brother John just didn't have time to play guitar anymore once he took over the farm, and I'd get this thing out and keep looking at it and figuring it out and just trying to figure it out.
Wow.
And I remember one day I looked at it and put my finger on the fretboard, and I started at the bottom. Well, I'd strum the open strings at first. I'd strum the open strings and I actually ended up making up a song based on just the open strings. And when you listen to it, if I played it for you now, it has rhythmic shape and form and harmonic shape and form. And I thought, God, I must have had something going on upstairs that understood this stuff at a very intuitive level. Mm. And then the discovery that if I held my finger at the first fret, hit the note and then slid my finger up the neck, the notes went up chromatically, and that was a revelation. And I did it the opposite direction, and I thought it's not as fun the opposite way because the notes die away quicker. But I managed to get some lessons off a guy here in town named Jeff Lyons, and Jeff was quite the local legend back then. And I look at the RSL hall where I took those lessons. I just looked at it the other day. I was sitting there waiting for my wife in the car, and I was looking at it going, wow, about 50 years ago or something, I was in there taking a guitar lesson.
Yeah.
And Jeff was great because he said, what do you want to do on the guitar? And I said, I want to be a lead guitar player. Because my brother, we had a party at our house and my brother put on Deep Purple in rock and Speed King came on, and I said, what is this? And he said, it's Deep Purple. They're the loudest band in the world. And I went, that's it, I'm in. It's a sale. In Rock was the first album I ever personally bought.
Wow.
So that's it. I was a Richie Blackmore disciple from that day on.
Yeah.
And Jeff said, well, okay, you want to learn lead guitar? And he drew a picture of a left hand in a book. And he wrote 1, 2, 3, 4 above the left hand fingers, excluding the thumb, of course. And he went 4 frets, 4 fingers, and he showed me always use all your fingers. And I thought, man, that's probably the best lesson you could get right off the bat, isn't it?
Yeah.
So many people start off with the more powerful configuration of 1, 2, 3, and the 4th finger is always left a bit wanting. And I thought, man, although, I see Guthrie Govan play, and Guthrie does some of the most insane stuff with just those 3 fingers. Greg Howard too. It's a lot of guys have so much capacity in those 3 fingers, and the 4th one's just this extra gear they kick in. But for me, I needed them. So I don't have much. I don't have much reach on the guitar. I have terrible stretch on the instrument, and my hands aren't particularly large. So yeah, it's a tough instrument for me. There's a lot of things I sure couldn't play in a Chuck Berry cover band. That's for sure. Doing those, doing those Chuck Berry riffs, but that's how it started. Jeff ended up giving me 4 lessons where he basically taught me 4 songs, and they were. I can remember them, but they don't mean anything here. But after that, I actually lost interest in it a little bit. I just sort of used to get the guitar out and just bash it and make noises on it, and my sister used to yell at me. And then my cousin Andrew came up to visit one day, found the guitar under the bed while we were hanging out, and I said, oh, yeah, and I got it out and I played my 4 lessons for him.
Oh, yeah?
And he just went, that's it, we're forming a band. Like, he was the real instigator. And he said, that's it, we're forming a band. So we grabbed my other cousin, Neil, and luckily his brother, Ron, was a bass player, professional bass player. He played with Tinsley Waterhouse and Broderick Smith and Linda George, people like that back in the 70s. And so Ron hooked Neil up with a bass and we got an amp from somewhere and grabbed our friend Ken Tanner and said, Ken, you're the drummer, buy a drum kit, drum kit, you know. So that was it. Like, I mean, we just started jamming at Andrew's farm in the shearing shed. And,
wow.
And it was hilarious. Like, every Saturday and Sunday, we'd start about 12 o'clock and we'd break at 6 o'clock to go down to Andrew's mother and father's place where his mother would dutifully feed us. And we'd watch Countdown from 6 till 7. So anyone that's my generation remembers Countdown with Molly Meldrum and all that. So we go down there and get a bit of inspiration. And they replayed Sunday's episode on the Saturday. So we'd watch the replay on Saturday, watch the brand new show on the Sunday, and then go up and probably go again till 10 o'clock at night. Like,
wow.
We just couldn't get enough of it. And I was absolutely thoroughly addicted to having that guitar in my hands. Like, I remember I went away with my mother and sister and her husband for a 2-week holiday, and I didn't take a guitar with me, and I went through just serious withdrawals. And by the time I got home, I just sort of threw everything in the door and just ran in and grabbed it.
Wow. And
that's when I realised, like, I was absolutely and thoroughly addicted to it. So, which is necessary. You can't. I just don't think you can end up a 61-year-old guy like me who still gets up in the morning and grabs it and starts playing it. Why would you do that if you were just ambitious? I mean, that's, you know, you're going to give up. If you just did it because you wanted to be rich and famous, I mean, my God, if that was my inclination, I would have quit years ago because none of it happened. But I just love playing music and expressing myself through that instrument. So
yeah, wow.
There it is, yeah.
Oh, it's so amazing.
That's what we did for 10 years. We had a pub band for 10 years and we just literally taught ourselves how to play.
Wow.
I remember that we did the first gig at a pub you would have driven past to get to this house, the Northern Hotel, and behind that is the huge factory that I did my apprenticeship at.
Okay.
And, you know, so there's a lot of history for me in this town.
Yeah, wow.
And, I remember the first night we went in there and played vividly, and we blew people's minds because they'd never seen a band that young before, especially me. I was 13, Neil was 15, and Andrew and Ken were 17. Okay. And they'd never seen a 13-year-old kid, let alone I walked in there with a Fender Strat, that Sunburst Strat on the stand over there. My mother bought that for me, well, I guess when I was 13. She bought it for me, and maybe I was about 14, I think. 14 when we did our first gig in the pub. But, yeah, I remember just saying to her, like, I'm never going to stop this, I swear. You know, it'll be the best investment you ever made. Because there was a lot of money back then. It was probably like buying a custom shop Strat now.
Wow.
Which for a widowed farmer's wife, that was a huge investment. And I didn't even realise how big of an investment that was. But, $650 in 1976 or something. Yeah, we worked it out. The equivalency was about $3,500. So,
wow.
So yeah, if this 13-year-old chubby little kid walks into this pub with a Fender Strat, like here, I might as well have pulled up outside in a spaceship. It was like, because only my mate Glenn Quill, who I'm still friends with to this day here in this town, he was the only other person anyone knew that had a Fender Strat. Back then, your options were Fender Gibson, Rickenbacker in terms of electric, and then there were a few very bad copies floating around. Ibanez they just started to surface making good copies.
Okay.
Not like these days where, just a few $100s will buy you a very good guitar. Whereas back then, everything was junk, and then there were the good ones.
Yeah. So. Whoa.
But yeah, that was it. We just taught ourselves in that band for 10 years. I lived here. We did local gigs. The benefit of it was I improvised all the time. We never seemed to have enough songs, so I'd end up doing 3-minute guitar solos to Jumping Jack Flash. God knows what they sounded like. Oh, I'd love to have recordings of them. They must have been hysterical, but you could get away with a lot back then because, young musicians weren't as good as they are now, that's for sure. Like, we were all rough, but there was a novelty factor there, so. But, damn, it was fun.
Yeah.
The weirdest thing, sorry, I gas bag a lot.
No,
you don't have to worry about it.
It's great.
I talk. But when I mentioned we'd go down and watch Countdown, this sort of had such an emotional impact for me because that meant a lot to us going down and watching that show, because it was one of the few opportunities to see any kind of music visually other than the radio. And I forget when the last episode of Countdown was, sometime, might have been late 90s or early 2000s, I'm not sure. But the very last act to play on Countdown in the history of its existence was John Farnham. I was standing on the stage closing that show off.
Wow.
And they had a series of sort of retrospective shows of Countdown, which were just a joy to watch. We'd watch them on ABC. They were a few years back. And once again, like the very last episode of that series, they closed it over the closing credits was my guitar solo of You're the Voice. So how weird is that? I mean, I don't know. It was a real interesting sort of I thought, man, all those years ago, sitting there chomping down our food, watching Countdown, who would have thunk it?
Yeah. And then it's you.
Yeah, weird, isn't it?
Yeah. So when did you realize that it was more than just, I don't know, your obsession with the guitar and playing with your family in the cover band, but like that you actually had something special going on, and it sort of became more than just playing the country scene, and you put yourself out there a bit more? That's
a great question, and there was a moment.
Okay.
Because I always just considered that I was nothing more than, and I don't mean this to put myself down, I just thought I'm a guy trying to figure out how to play like the people in my record collection. And so, because, I obviously had chops and stuff like that at quite an early age. They were primitive, but chops nonetheless. And seeing this little kid shredding all over a guitar back then was very unusual. And people used to walk up to me and they'd, "You're the best guitar player in the world," and all this sort of junk, And it's like if I'd been a little less aware, it could have gone to my head and I'd ended up a right idiot. But but I just look at them and go, no, I'm not. Like, I could walk into my album collection and at random grab any album and they were better than me. What I'm going to do, grab Wired and listen to Jeff Beck and go, I'm much better than Jeff Beck. No, long way to go, son. So anyway, my whole, and especially when Eddie Van Halen came along and Alan Holdsworth, because I heard about Alan through Eddie's interviews, and so once I sort of got those guys as like people, and there were many more, like Rory Gallagher, Richie Blackmore, Jimmy Page, Jimi Hendrix, Santana, you name it, David Gilmour, just the list goes on and on, all my brother's record collection. So, I mean, I just had this constant reality check of what great really was. And I certainly didn't think I had any kind of sound. All I knew was that whenever I tried to sound like Alan or Eddie, it wasn't cutting it, This other sound would come out of the amp and it was so frustrating. I was like, oh my God, I'm getting this wrong. I can't do this. I thought if you could sound exactly like your heroes, then you were getting it right. You were doing something right. I don't know why I thought that, because I knew all my heroes had their own identity. I guess I just felt like I didn't deserve to have one. And I remember I used to go down to Ringwood, just the other side of Melbourne there, and go to a place called Soundworks where Paul Gale would fix my equipment. And when I had time to kill, when they said, we're going to be a while, and I'd be like, okay. So I'd walk down the street to what then was Helmet's Music and in Ringwood. And I remember walking in there one day and this guy was sitting there demonstrating a guitar for somebody, and he was incredible. This guy, this is a guy working in a shop. And I thought, if he's just working in a shop, what hope have I got? And if this is what people that work in shops, if they're all this good, that was Phil Buckle.
Wow.
And then I went back many months later, of course, to the same shop. And I don't think I even noticed Phil was in there, but I looked at one of the other guys and I said, do you mind if I just go down and noodle on a guitar? And they said, yeah, go whatever you want to do. I remember I walked down the back where they had guitars and amps set up, and you could plug into an amp. That was okay. There was a sign on the wall that said, under no circumstances should Smoke on the Water or Stairway to Heaven be played. And I thought, ooh, tough room. And I had the amp so quiet, you could actually hear the electric acoustically over the top of it. It was just basically giving me the vibe of some sustain. So I'm sitting in there doing my thing, just whittling away as you do. And this head came around the corner, and it was Phil. And he said, what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm sorry, man, am I playing too loud? And he said, no, just what are you doing? I said, oh, I'm just mucking about, And he said, carry on. And I had this rave in the pubs around here where people would come up and say, because no one had ever seen anybody do finger tapping before. No one knew who Van Halen was until, Jump and the Beat It solo maybe, but especially Jump. No one around locally even knew who that band was. I was way ahead of the curve when it came to that stuff. And I had this rave when people would come up and say, "You're the greatest guitar player I've ever seen. I've never seen anybody do this stuff." And I'd say, No, I'm trying to copy these two guys. And I'd grab a beer coaster and write Eddie Van Halen and Alan Holdsworth on it. And they'd sort of give me this weird look and wander off. And I meant that. Like, I was like, that's what I'm trying to do is copy these guys, and failing dismally. And every time I tried to work out anything they were doing, I couldn't get it right. It always morphed into something else. And I started to give Phil the same rave, and I said, no, I'm trying to copy these two guys. And he was the first person that ever said, I know who those two guys are. What are you doing? And he was the first person that pointed out that I was actually doing something, like something unique to myself. I don't mean unique in the world, but there was a personality in there that he heard. And he told me that. He said, you got your own thing going on. He said, keep working at that. And Phil and I became really good friends over the years. Like, he was so kind. His band played in Bendigo. I think they were called the Cutters. And he asked our band to go and support him, which was fantastic. And I stayed friends with him all the way through when he was the State. The band was called the State with Virgil and the other guys who eventually became Southern Sons. Mm-hmm. And I knew Jack Jones or Erwin Thomas before he joined that band. And,
wow.
And it was great. I sort of got to know all these people, but yeah, Phil and I go way back. But Phil was that guy that said, be aware of that sound that you hate because it's you. But it was great. All of a sudden I changed my whole perspective on it, and I thought I should develop this because all of a sudden I realised, like, everybody's got that. When I taught at GIT for years, like, a lot of the students didn't realise that they had it, and I said, if we all sat in here playing and you blindfolded me, I've taught you guys for ages. I could tell you all apart. It's just subtle. It could be a vibrato, the way you slide in and out of a note, the way you angle the pick to get a certain sound or whatever. It's so nuanced. We've all got it, but just not everybody gives it the time it deserves, I don't think.
Yeah. Well, it seems so great that you've had such, like, excellent insight and, like, small guidance from that, like, first teacher saying, like, all fingers, and then the encouragement you got there playing in that shop and the relationship that built from there.
I gave everything the ounce of salt it was worth. Like, one of my teachers at tech school, when I went to tech school, he was in a local band. And I remember one day one of my schoolmates was taking guitar lessons from him, and he took great pride in, he could be a bit of a dick, so he took great pride in telling me I was a bad guitar player.
Oh, right.
But I didn't take offence at it. I said, well, tell me why, why? What am I doing wrong? And he said, see, you don't follow the chords when you solo. And I went, okay, follow the chords when I solo. Once again, brilliant information. Like, even if I was playing, like, over a chord progression that was just diatonic to C major, like, say if it went from C to A minor, like, all of a sudden everything I'm playing is based around A minor, I follow chord tones, and I didn't know I was doing it, but that's because he said, follow the chords. He also told me that I should turn off all my distortion and immediately buy a set of strings with a wound third, which I dutifully did, and the minute I tried to bend that wound third, I just went, nah, he's full of it, so I took that off there. So I at least gave him the benefit of the doubt. Like, when people told me things, I thought about it. And so I wasn't, like, set in my ways. And especially if it was an older musician, I really had enormous respect for older players because I knew they had experience and I did not. So I loved getting to meet older musicians so I could learn stuff. And it was rare. It was hard to find people around here. We were all in the same boat. None of us really knew any more than anybody else, so we were just winging it. But yeah, like meeting a musician like Phil. Unfortunately, I never got a chance to really pick Phil's brain about the guitar. When I used to go to Soundworks, a fantastic musician named Wayne Munger worked there. And I would talk to Wayne a lot, and Wayne was just, genius, I think he's since passed away, unfortunately, but man, just if I just had a minute with some of these players, like I'd try and. When I first worked with John, Sam C was in the band, and
Yes.
I was so intimidated I didn't ask Sam anything about guitar playing. I was dying to walk up and say, "Sam, can you show me some stuff?" And I thought, no, I can't do that. If I do that, he might look at me and say, "Well, if you're asking me, what are you doing here?" You know, and I didn't know. Sam would have probably been stoked. He probably would have said, "Yeah, I'd love to." You know,
Yeah.
And, what a missed opportunity that was. So.
It's quite impressive that, you often hear stories of like someone being quite talented and it's like, big fish in a small pond, and then they come to like, the major city or something, and it's like a bit of a reality check that, I was the best at my school or in the best in the town or something, but now there's all these other people and it's very different. But you've sort of consistently had this like, I'm learning and I'm seeking out these, people that can play better or different or they're wise. And it seems like you must have carried that through like in the Farnham band period as well, because you were quite young and, there's some quite experienced guys coming into that project.
Well, the interesting curve of John's whole thing was what happened was I was working at that factory, and I did my apprenticeship there as a plumber, and I continued to work there as their in-house plumber. And then they ended up having this huge bunch of retrenchments or layoffs, redundancies.
Okay.
And I was one of them, and it was great. I had 2 weeks off, and they hired me back as a private contractor, and it just dawned on me like I'm the boss. Like I couldn't quit that job and go off to become a musician because we were just brought up that way. You don't.
Right.
When you got a job, you don't quit it, which is dumb. It was a dumb way of thinking, but unfortunately, it was kind of the mindset around here in a small country town. Is you don't quit a job, and you definitely don't quit a job to go off and try and be a musician. That's borderline insanity. Whereas once I realised that it was my job to quit, I was the boss, you know what I mean? I wasn't quitting a job, I was just deciding to do something else. So that's when I started sending out those tapes.
Okay.
And back then there was a magazine. This is like, it must have been early 85. And there was a magazine called Sonics, which was sort of like our Australian industry sort of magazine, and they do a yearbook, and I found it, and in that yearbook they'd put a lot of record company management, equipment company names and addresses. It was a very valuable resource for anything, and I thought, great. So I just did a whole bunch of tapes of my little demos I'd done at home with me playing drums and bass. They were rough as bags, but that's all I had, and I just wrote handwritten letters to dear whoever, and I just started picking names of record companies and management companies, and all the record company ones came back as unsolicited material because I didn't know.
Okay.
Only one other management company sort of did talk to me, but I could tell it wasn't going anywhere. And the only letter I got, which is in a frame on the wall down there in our living room, was the one from Glenn Wheatley. And it just said, "Dear Brett, I just got your tape, please call me." So I thought, this has got to be good. No one writes a letter like that short unless they're interested. And I picked up the phone as soon as I got the letter and called Glenn, and he picked up. And it was just brilliant. He said, "Oh, man, loved your tape." And he said, "John Farnham's putting together a band just to do some pub shows while Little River Band are having a hiatus." John was still a member of LRB at this time. And he said, "Would you like to be in it?" And I was like, oh, my God, because I'd been a fan of John's for a long time and a big LRB fan of John's era because they just put out The Net, I think. And I just loved that record and was marvelling at John's singing on that. And he's anywhere, really, like from Help to all the stuff from Uncovered. And I was just going... I remember I used to think, like, can this guy sing like this live? Because I was a big fan of metal bands and things, and none of them could sing live like that. They'd always run out of breath and duck melodies and all that stuff. They're only human after all. And my mates and I piled into a car and went to Bathurst. And now, what year was it? Like, it was like 1980. God, it must have been 83 or something like that. I did find it on the internet, and they built this amphitheatre at Bathurst, and they started to have live bands there.
Okay.
And the very first band they had was LRB. Huh. And if you'd bought a ticket to the race, you could go to the gigs. So we went up, we climbed, walked all the way from down near the pits, all the way up the mountain, and watched LRB. And I remember standing there watching John, just going, "Oh my God, he's not only cutting it, like he's not only singing what he's done on the albums, he's just obliterating it." I realised that what he was singing on the albums that I thought was next to impossible, he was holding back. And that was a wild gig for a whole lot of reasons. Like, I mean, while we were all standing there watching the gig, all the yobbos up on top of the mountain were throwing stubbies.
Oh.
And they were smashing on the ground. It was unbelievable. It was just, I remember I couldn't believe it when we started off working in John's band and Wayne Nelson was playing bass, and they were all casual, because a lot of the crew that were there worked with LIB and everything, and they were just casually talking, and Wayne said, God, remember that gig we did at Bathurst? What a nightmare that was. And I just sort of casually said, yeah, I was there. And he just, you were there? And I was like, yeah, I almost got killed by a stubby. So. But anyway, yeah, that was when I realised what a force of nature John was. And that band, actually. Like, I mean, every time I saw LIB, I walked out going, damn, that's the best live band I've ever seen. And that was both with Shorik and John. So,
wow.
Anyway, so yeah, when Glenn offered me this opportunity, I was like, oh my God, yes, I'd love to. This was 1985, late 1985. And I remember being petrified, thinking, oh my God, I hope there's another guitar player there. And luckily Sam C was there. So it was David Hirschfelder, Sam C, Nicky Nichols, Bruno de Stanislaw on bass, Nicky on BVs, Sam on guitar, Derek Polici on drums, and Hershey on keyboard, of course. And I remember eventually they rang me up and said, yeah, come down to John's place and we're just going to have a jam and see how you go. And so I remember driving down to John's place with my girlfriend, and he opened the door. It was his house, and it was just wild. I must have excelled at playing it cool, because I was freaking out, you know. And John's wife Jill still laughs when she remembers this, because I walked in. I used to use this little cassette player as a practice amp. I couldn't drag my Marshall down there, and she said, yeah, you walked in with this cassette.
Oh, you took the cassette
I took the cassette player. It was hilarious, yeah. And but anyway, I walked in and Ross Fraser was there, so I met Ross, and they were working on a demo for Let Me Out. And they said, yeah, we're just working on something, just chuck a solo on it. And I remember this. I remember that the solo was in a very strange key, so it was a little challenging, and it moved in strange ways, but I blew a couple of takes and got lucky and didn't hit any clangers, so I did okay. Because back then it was all instinct, you know. I wasn't thinking about modes or anything like that. It was just throw your hands at it, man. Use your ears, hope for the best, and see what happens. But they did. Ross said, what would you play in the verses? And I said, well, I don't know. There's no vocal. I don't really know what I'd do. And John said, I'll chuck a vocal on for you real quick. So he just grabbed a 57 and stood there in his lounge room and sang it. And I remember that on the album, the song was in F sharp, but this demo put the vocal in A. Oh. So he was singing like high A's. Like, I'm talking 15th fret on your high E string on your guitar at 11 o'clock in the morning. No warm-up, just did it. And I was just standing there. I don't know what I played after that. I think I was so freaked out I didn't play anything, but it didn't matter. They loved what I did and said, yeah, come and do the gigs. And oh, my God, it was so much fun.
Wow.
It was just so amazing, like, to be in the room with that caliber of musicianship. And Hershey turned up and he had the Fairlight, the Prophet 5, the CP70, you know, it was awesome, you know. And just to play with those musos that were so good. And all I had to do was just hang in there, you know what I mean? But they were so great. Like, I did another interview with a friend of mine, and he said, because you were the young guy, I was probably the youngest by about 10 years, I suppose.
Yep.
Maybe a little less, but and he said, were they trying to sort of hold you down and all that sort of stuff? I said, no, they were trying to lift me up, you know. It was nothing but positivity. Like, it was weird. Like, I thought, my God, is that the attitude of young musicians these days, that old guys are trying to hold them back? Like, that's weird to me. I looked at older musicians when I was younger as like huge sources of information and learning. Like, I thought if I was lucky enough to get around older, more experienced players, you know, ask questions and then shut up and listen and learn something. You know what I mean? Because they've been there, done that. Like, that's a weird attitude. I hope young people don't feel that way. I hope they really understand that experience is experience, you know. It's like, and sometimes you got to get older to get that, because you got to get out there and do it. So, I'd hate them to look at older players and think, oh, they're old, they got nothing to teach me. That's not true, you know. So, anyway, but yeah, that was a blast. And the good thing was, after we did that tour, like, I think we played a couple of tunes that ended up on Whispering Jack. We might have done Reasons because Sam was in the band and Sam wrote it. So I think we played Reasons, and we definitely played Touch of Paradise.
Oh yeah.
So I think we did, and I think we did Let Me Out as well. I think I got to do the big solo. So not the long one, but the same length as the album.
Yep.
And we played some really fun stuff. Nicky Nichols sang Whole Lot of Love, and John put Legs from ZZ Top, and Black Knight. We played Black Knight, Deep Purple. I had so much fun. It was just out of control. And then of course John went back to LRB the next year, and I went back to plumbing again. So, but Ross did say, look, he said, we're going to do an album next year, so we'll have you come down and do some guitars. And I just bugged him, you know, like must have rang him once a week. It was basically, get me out of this place, you know, I want to come and be a musician. And so I think it was about June I went down and did all the guitars on Whispering Jack.
Wow.
And it was just me, John and Ross and Doug Brady, who was engineering in the studio. And that was just tremendous. We did about 5 days and did all that. And then it came out in about September, I think August, September. And this is the beauty of it, because everyone goes, oh, you just, you know, went from nowhere to this meteoric rise to all this sort of stuff. But I love the fact that I worked with John before that album. And, you know, he was doing it hard. He was struggling because LRB was struggling. And I felt terrible. I just thought, if based on the man's talent, he should have been the richest guy in the world, you know. But that was my lesson of show business, where just because you're supremely talented at what you do doesn't mean you're going to be successful. It was much more complex than that. And even to learn that when that album came out, which I learned a lot from watching the movie when it came out, the documentary, like John and Glenn had to struggle to even get anyone to play it. And I had no idea, you know, I had no idea. And but I just was so excited when I could see it start to take off. And it was the public that, as they said in the doco, they said it's the public that made it a hit. And yeah, thank God. Couldn't happen to a better, more deserving individual than John Farnham, I'll tell you that much. What a fantastic person. So,
did it feel special when you were making it? Like, putting aside the sort of, you know, awe of like John and the, like, you know, impressiveness of the way you looked at him and described what it was like watching him sing. Did that album, as you were making it, feel like, oh yeah, like this album's really gonna like resonate with people, or this is something special?
Well, it resonated with me. I mean, and I still didn't have a clear idea of what a lot of the songs sounded like, because a lot of them we didn't have vocals on them.
Okay.
But it just was so unique the way they did it, where they committed to the whole drum machine, synth bass. Like Hershey built all that music up using synths and keyboards, and they committed to that. It's not like the half of it was that and the other half was live drums or whatever. Like I thought that was really, really special in an artistic sense.
Yeah.
And in a way, yeah, you can listen to it now and think it sounds dated, but the approach isn't dated in that sense, because it's unique. If you listen to that album from one end to the next, it's a consistent sound scape, if you like.
Yeah, sure.
And I really do. I like that. And to me, and at the time, it was groundbreaking. I mean, they were the sounds people were using back then. That was the peak of technology back then. But at the time, look, to be perfectly honest, I was so naive. I had no reference point. It was the first time I'd ever been in a major studio.
Wow.
And the hilarious thing was, we went in there and we started work, right? We started working on Trouble was the first track we worked on. And they had 24-track analog machines going. And we'd been at it for about an hour. And all of a sudden, Doug Brady went, oh, no. And everyone's, you know, Ross was like, what? What's oh, no? And he said, the oxide's falling off the tape. And I had a great conversation with a guy just the other day about this who knew that knew about that.
Yeah,
and,
right.
he said that, Ampex, I think it was, just they tried to – everyone was having a war, like BASF and 3M and Ampex were having a war about who could get the most volume out of what they were printing to their tapes. This is what this chap told me the other day. And so Ampex was trying to win that war, but they had to shortchange the thickness of the oxide or something. Oh. And so it started falling off the tape. So they quickly had to back everything up, and the only machine they could grab was a 32-track Mitsubishi digital. Oh. I remember Ross saying, well, it's a digital album now, and that was that. And I'm looking at him going, so this happens all the time, right? This is normal stuff in a recording, like every recording session is, well, we'll record for a couple of hours and wait till the oxide falls off and then bag it all up to digital. But no, this was a unique circumstance.
Wow.
So it was wild, to be there when all that happened. It could have gone very badly, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess if you were still doing all the plumbing work then, like if I think of the music video of You're the Voice, you first get introduced with this like slow pan that like comes up and reveals like the skimpiest singlet and the biggest biceps.
Oh my God.
The guitarist.
Oh, they weren't that big, but no, my good mate Daryl got me involved in weightlifting because he was doing it, and that was look. I was always I always struggled with my weight as a kid. I was a little bit chubby because I loved eating my sweets, and my mother was a fantastic cook. and then of course, I lost a lot of weight when I started working as a physical job like plumbing. So then I got really skinny, and I couldn't seem to find a happy medium. And I just didn't really understand that you had direct control over your physicality. I thought people that were fit were born that way. Mm-hmm. And I just noticed this big lump in Daryl's arm one day, and it was a tricep. And I said, how come your arm's got that big lump in it, Daryl? And he sort of said, I lift weights. And I said, God, show me how to lift weights. So we really got stuck into it. We really enjoyed it and started getting into powerlifting, which was the competitive thing. And we were never bodybuilders or anything like that, running around in, our undies flexing for people or anything like that. But we really enjoyed the powerlifting, and that was great fun. We'd all sort of do it as a group of mates, and I just did it because, you should do something to be fit. Us guitar players are unless you're Angus Young, you were very sedentary people. We don't do much movement, and so I really enjoyed getting out there and being fit and trying to be healthy. And it was just sort of funny that I was only about 21 or just turned maybe 22 when we did that video. And everyone sort of noticed that the video director, I think, said, you're kind of buff, let's put him in a tank top. So I had a little tank top, and I think they put glycerine on me or something, so I looked like I was sweating. It was just weird, but it was a bit of fun.
Showbiz.
Well, yeah, it was just funny. And the funniest thing was, I used to wear tank tops. David Hirschfelder's father called me the man of many tank tops, and I had this one with Mambo written on it, which is like the surf brand, I think, isn't it? Yeah. And I remember Steve Housden was backstage at one of John's early gigs, and he looked at the tank top and said, "What's that got written on it? Rambo." And John went, "Oh, that's it. You're Rambo from now on." So he thought that was hysterical, and so even the crew just called me Rambo. One of the crew called me Rambet, I think. And that's when I started to put a headband on and sort of ham it up a bit, I think doing all that helped me get over the absolute petrifying fear of the fact that I was doing this. I kind of thought, I'm going to have to sort of play act a bit here, cosplay a bit, just to try and... This was a shock, to come from a little town like this with no professional background at all, absolutely naive, and being a shy person. I'm not an outgoing person in any way, like when it comes to playing music. I love to play music, and that's natural for me, but performing it is not. I'm not the guy that walks into a room, sees a guitar in the corner and can't wait to pick it up and play for everybody. That's not me. I love watching other people do that, and that's why it bugs the hell out of me when people are like, play us something. It's like, I'm not Tommy Emmanuel. I'm not a solo performer. I play in a band. I need a band around me, and that's how I function. So that's how it works. So, yeah, I think that's where a lot of that dressing up as Rambo and all that garbage came from. And it's funny to look back on, but I kind of wish I'd done things differently now, but well, whatever. I was young. I needed the money.
Well, if we fast forward to now, like you've just put out the book about the hybrid picking.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that, you're still developing technically and like just as excited about as when you were first like delving into like the obsession you have? Like you mentioned that you still pick up the guitar in the morning now and you just,
Yeah, because the funny thing about the hybrid picking is this goes all the way back to the early 70s when you couldn't see anybody. And if you had to just be lucky enough to catch them either at a live concert, so that was out because I lived here. No one played here. You had to go to Melbourne, and going to Melbourne back then for me as a young person was like, you might as well have said, let's pop up to Mars and do the shopping. It's like Melbourne was an imaginary place I never got to. And TV, we had two channels. There was the ABC and there was a local Bendigo station. And maybe on a windy day with the antenna was pointing the right way, you get a fuzzy version of one from Ballarat. But the odds of seeing anything musical, the ABC was your best bet. There were shows like the Old Grey Whistle Test and Countdown, and I did get to see a lot of great stuff on those. But as far as getting anything technical out of it, it was rare. It was hard. And so I was trying to, a friend of mine gave me a Leo Kottke album. It was called The Best, and it was great. It was like 4 sides and some really great stuff. And I was trying to play these Leo Kottke tunes, and I was trying to play them with a flat pick and wondering why it was so hard. And there was another beautiful song. It was an intro to a song called Spiral Architect on Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, because Tony Iommi was a beautiful acoustic player. I think he might have been classically trained. And it's a beautiful piece. It's really nice. And I think Tony probably played it with the thumb and 3 fingers, classical style, whereas I was trying to play it with a flat pick and the other 3 fingers, with some of my little fingers struggling away trying to play this thing. And I thought, well, I've just got to work harder. That's it. And I was the second finger on my right hand especially was joining in with the pick to play things, and it just started happening. And I thought, I guess this is what happens when you play guitar. I didn't realise it was an anomaly as such. But I hadn't even seen any country players. Like, country players did chicken picking all the time. That's actually what it is. Hybrid picking was a modern term that I discovered just before I did my first instructional video for REH all those way back in like 93. But people started calling it hybrid picking, and I thought, that's what it is. So that's what I'll call it in the video. So it was this new term that was starting to get bandied about. But I had quite a bit of a facility with it, because to me that was the only way I had access to any kind of movement like that, any kind of arpeggiated figure. Right. And but I didn't know any exercises to develop it. It was just there, and I used it to play, but I didn't think anything of it. I do remember the strangest thing when I was about to do that gig with John, the very first tour, and my friends and I went down to, it was a Brash's store in Melbourne, because I wanted to try and buy another amp that could make a clean sound, because all I had was the Marshall. Okay. And you could sort of get a kind of less fuzzy sound out of it if I turned the guitar down, but not a clean sound. And I thought, I'm going to have to switch between 2 amps. So I went into the Brash's store and I actually brought my guitar with me. And typically, I remember all the guys that worked in there were really hip and happening people, and they had the spiked up hair and the hip clothes, and as the 80s were. And we walked in looking like we got lost on the way to an AC/DC concert, like blue jeans, Adidas sneakers, black shirts, and they kind of laughed at us when we walked in, and I thought, yeah, fair enough, see the hayseeds sticking out of our ears. And I said, can I try an amp? And the guy said, yeah, sure. And so I went over and got my guitar out, and I was trying I think it was what sort of amp was it? A Carvin it might have been. Okay. Yeah, unusual. And I didn't bring a guitar pick. Typical me. I went back to the guy and sheepishly said, can I borrow a guitar pick, please? I remember the guy said, you want me to play it for you, mate? And I was like, no, I'm fine. And I thought, Jesus, I'm really making a fool out of myself here. But I sat there, same drill, quiet, not bothering anybody, and just started noodling about testing the amp out. And the guy came over and said, what are you doing? And the same rave as I gave to Phil Buckle, like, I'm sorry, what am I bothering you? And He said, no, your right hand. What's going on there? And I just started playing, and he said, geez, does anybody do that before? And I went, oh, okay, and that was it. But it was when I was once again down at Soundworks, and this was probably 88 or 89, I think it might have been.
Mm-hmm.
And Soundworks had developed into a bit of a sort of a retail store as well as doing repairs, and Phil Buckle was working there. And they used to play instructional videos in the background while they were just hanging out. And they had Vinnie Moore on, and Vinnie Moore's first instructional video. And Vinnie's phenomenal, amazing player, still is. And I'm watching it, just standing there watching it. And he did a sweep arpeggio, just this quick, back and forth across all six strings. And I went, oh my God, what's that? I've never seen anything like it before. And Phil just went, it's a sweep arpeggio. He knew, Phil could do all that stuff. And I said, I've never seen anything like that before, Phil. And he said, maybe you should take this home and look at it. And he gave me Frank Campali's first video. So I took it home and put it on and went, Jesus, look at this. And was just absolutely gobsmacked watching Frank for the next hour and a bit or whatever it was. But to be honest, I was blown away by the right-hand technique, by the sweeping. But I was really amazed at how he was using his left hand. Like, the one thing Frank was doing, one of the many things Frank was doing was sweeping 2 strings and 3 strings, and the metal guys usually did them all. And I even tried it, and I thought it's a lot easier to do them all than it is to do 2, that's for sure.
Yeah, right.
And I was looking at how Frank was organising the notes on the neck to utilise the sweeping so he could not only play arpeggios but sort of more scale lines. And I thought, God, could I do that with my fingers? And I remember I did 4 down, 4 back, reversed them,
Uh-huh.
And I went, oh my God, I can do it. And it was like someone tapped me on the head with a wand and said, now you can do this. Because I just never considered really exploiting it like that.
Yes.
And I spent about the next year just working on ideas, all thanks to Frank.
Wow.
And then the weird thing was, it wasn't that much later I was doing that album, Centrifugal Funk, with Frank, and I got to meet him. I was just finishing up my tracks when Frank walked in, and I got to meet him, and he was just awesome. And
cool.
Yeah, we had a big chat, and I told him how his video had blown me away, and he was telling me how, he said I was at a turning point where it was like, well, I either go to Sydney and study there, or I go to GIT, and I chose GIT, and wasn't long after that he got the Chick Corea gig, and was just becoming a sensation. So what an amazing thing,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, what's it like now where, we sort of mentioned a little bit just while we were setting up, where like you're doing the remote work. Like I see you do a lot of like guest features on people's albums and singles and stuff like that. It's quite a different world in like the modern age to do the like remote stuff rather than like, everybody having to come into a studio and stuff.
Right.
Do you enjoy that experience of being able to come in and, being like a featured solo or something like that as a guest appearance where you can just do it from, the controlled environment of your home and play with the sounds and stuff as much as you want?
Oh, yeah, it's a joy. Like, it's lovely to get to do it here where I'm comfortable. And that's the thing too, because a lot of people want video now. Mm-hmm. So you've got to go for takes. I mean, it's different if I can sit and punch in and really try to manicure something, not to create the impossible solo, but a solo that I love composing solos through improvisation. I love molding a solo to suit a song because I love those sort of songs where that solo just sits there, and so that's great fun too. I'll work tirelessly to do that and make sure that if I'm working for somebody, they get the best I can give them. Mm-hmm. And then the other aspect of it is I've got to set up cameras and give them a take, because they want video. And it's like, well, I can't punch in on a video, I've got to nail it. So there's the other challenge that's involved. So it's essentially like doing a live performance. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. It's a live performance that I can do multiple attempts, but I recently did one for this project called G10, and I almost emailed them back and said, fellas, I don't think I can do this. It's a really full-on progressive track that goes for about nearly 14 minutes, and my solo was the last one, but it's tough. It's like they're really weird chords that I'm playing over, and it's full on. It's full on double kick. Atma Anua played drums on it, and he killed it. Like for 13 and a half minutes, Atma just tore this song up on the drums. It's amazing. It's an amazing performance. And but I persevered with it, and I thought, come on, you got to get something out of it. So the first chunk of it's like all half step, whole step, diminished, and altered scales, and then luckily it sort of becomes more melodic in the end, and then I'm in my wheelhouse. So, but no, I love doing that. I love doing the remote thing. It's great fun, and I still do love doing sessions. But sessions are a challenge if you can't be set up really well. Like I remember listening to Steve Lukather interviews, and he talked about how in the old days, in the 80s, when they were doing 24-track sessions and where you even had to fight to run in stereo, but what you were printing was pretty much the finished product. Like by the time they'd finished tracking, you almost had the finished mix in a way. And because I thought about that, like to pull off the tracks that they did, they must have had good mixes in their cans. And I've done some hellacious sessions where it's the most uninspired, dry, cruddy situation, whereas I love being at home where I can spend an hour looking for just the right sound.
Yeah.
And for the part, you know what I mean? You can be really creative at home. So, I love doing this. So, and so, if anyone wants me on their song, hit me up. I love it. So.
Well, it's interesting, like the way you're saying, like, oh, well, it's like a live performance when you got to do it to video.
Right.
Like it's like a bit of a full circle of like, you would have started recording onto tape and then you've gone into like digital where you can just drop in as many, things as you want. And now you're like back, I've got to do like a one take live thing.
That's right. That's right. Because for me, other people are good at learning what they've played and then doing, say, a play along to it, which makes sense. But I'm hopeless at that. I'm terrible at transcribing myself. My whole approach is, it's why I hit wrong notes all the time, because I try to be as random as possible. Like, it's hard to sort of surprise yourself when you've been playing for a long time. and so I push myself to try and do that. And so consequently, I'm halfway through a lick and I go, not this old thing again. So I try and turn left instead of right. And, sometimes my fingers get tangled in knots and it's like, back to the drawing board. But then other times things happen and I go, wow, what is that? Like, what's that? Like, I do surprise myself a lot of times, which I love. It's just there's a lot of crash and burn involved in it. So, but I don't know. If you don't mind your ego getting bashed around a bit, that's where the fun is, I think.
Yeah. Well, I would love to just keep asking you questions, but I'm aware of the time, so I should wrap up with like the final segments of the podcast.
Okay.
But I'll like pester you to let me come back and ask you about like Slide and all some
By
some
then
of the US journeys too.
I'll let everybody know my computer and studio is not set up at the moment because it's going through an upgrade. But when you come back, we can actually play. So no probs. So.
Well, we've been playing this like little game where I get each guest to ask a question of the next guest. They don't know who it is, so it's just like an anonymous musical question.
All right.
So I've got a question for you from songwriter and singer Mel O'Neill, whose artist name is Marigolden.
Okay.
If you could only play one song on your instrument for the rest of your life, what song would it be?
Oh, boy. If you could only play one song on your instrument for the rest of your life, what would it be? Geez. It'd be my song Brothers, and I don't say that from an egotistical place. I mean, if I could only play it for the rest of my life, I'd finally be able to play it properly. But it's the only song I ever wrote that's sort of designed for just one guitar player because I love to overdub so much. All my other songs are really hard to play because I pile all these parts on. But it's the only song I ever wrote where it's sort of designed to be played in a trio. So maybe I'd choose that one because, like I said, at least then I'd be able to play it really well. I don't practice it enough. So,
well, what question would you like to ask our next guest?
How would you go about describing to a non-musician what it feels like to be so passionately involved with playing music and what it's brought to your life and why they should try and get involved in it too?
It's a great question. Have you gone, like, being a country guy with mates that were doing trades and working on farms and stuff like that to be like, oh, like I'm doing the musician thing, and like the stigma or like the challenging nature of that, which is just so different to what most other people do.
Yeah, well, I mean, you get used to the fact that you can't really plan ahead too much, especially financially. You have no idea what your year is going to be like. It could be great. It could be a struggle. Whereas all my friends that work regular jobs, their year is mapped out financially because they know how often they're going to work. They know what their taxes will be. They know what their income's going to be. So if they've got a fairly secure line of work, then they can say, well, I'm going to buy that car and spend this much time paying it off, and I'll put this on extension on the house and pay that off over the course of years. But that is the trade-off. Sometimes when you do what you love to do, it's never a guarantee, not unless you're a very successful artist in and of your own right, which I'm afraid I'm not. I'm a hired gun, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I mean, I never thought I'd ever end up being a professional musician, let alone getting to work with the amazing people I've been able to work with and go the places I've been and see the things I've seen and done. And what a gift. I mean, I really am one of the luckiest people ever. So I don't take it for granted at all.
And one of the most amazing guitarist players as well.
The most amazing guitar player named Brett in this room. So.
All right, well, 5 quick answer questions to wrap up.
All right.
What is your favourite venue to play in Melbourne?
The funniest thing is about a couple of years back now, we got to play with Robbie Williams. And because it was only like 2022 maybe, so the pandemic severity of it had only just started to wind down. We're all still wearing masks and stuff around everybody, but it was starting to sort of just get back to where we could trickle out there. And I remember we just did 2 shows at Rod Laver. And I remember thinking like, I haven't done a live gig in a long time, and here I am with Robbie Williams at Rod Laver. This is weird. And we went out there and started playing. We rehearsed really well, so I knew the songs back to front. That wasn't a problem. I remember standing there and thinking, this is pretty normal. And going, this room isn't that big. And I sound like a snob, but the thing is, like, all the gigs I've done there with John over the years and various other things, like, I know that room really well. Like, it sounds snobby to say it, but I've just been so lucky to work there so much with John. He's done a lot of gigs there. and been playing in that place since they built it. And it was the strangest feeling. I thought, this feels like my local pub, it was
wow.
So and it was great fun. Like, I mean, once again, just how lucky can you be? That's what I'm thinking, not how wonderful am I, but how lucky am I to be able to do this in this circumstance and just really just thoroughly enjoy it and not be nervous or freaked out or anything like that. Because God, it's fun. Oh, what a gift to do this for a living.
Well, is there a dream venue that you would love to play at?
I don't know. I was just sort of getting nostalgic the other night and watching U2 at Red Rocks. That'd be pretty fun.
Oh yeah.
What an amazing place that must be. So, let's take Red Rocks. So.
What is your coffee order?
Latte. Usually extra strong. So I like lattes, but as long as it's got coffee in it and the spoon stands up in it, I'm ready to go. So.
What is your favourite place to get food after a gig in Melbourne?
In Melbourne? I'd always looking for any kind of Asian food. Yeah, any kind of noodles or anything like that. So probably head to Chinatown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and finally, what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
Don't dress like Rambo. I don't know. Maybe that'd be one of them. What would it be? Write more songs. Or no, actually no. It'd just be ask more questions. I didn't take advantage of, because of my shyness, I didn't ask more questions of the amazing musicians I got to be around. And I mean all of them, drummers, keyboard players, bass players, you name it, anyone. So yeah, ask more questions.
Well, Brett, if anyone wants to get in contact with you to do some, sessions or lessons or listen to your music, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Well, I mean, they can contact me through so many sources, like on YouTube. I think my email's on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. My email's just brett212@gmail.com, Brett with 2 T's. So yeah, hit me up. I'm happy to play on anyone's project. I love it. It's like, why not? Otherwise, I'm sitting here staring at this beautiful view.
Well, I'll put all the links in the on the website with your episode so that people can just click straight through to all of it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much for doing this, Brett. It's been so lovely to have this chat with you.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for asking me, Luke.
I guess finally, are drummers musicians?
That's the funniest thing, because when I saw the title of your podcast, like when you think of Virgil Donati, who a couple of years back released a full symphonic album, which he scored entirely by himself. And then you think about, Pete Drummond, there's another drummer who's a phenomenal keyboard player. Gary Husband, who used to play drums with Alan Holdsworth, but he spent a lot of time touring with John McLaughlin as his keyboard player. Oh yeah. There's a lot of drummers out there that have put me to shame as a musician, that's for sure.
Thanks so much for doing this, Brett. It's been great.
All right, thanks.
Thanks for joining us on Our Drummers Musicians. I hope you enjoyed diving into the world of another musician as much as I did. Help us grow by leaving a review and sharing the podcast with your friends, family, favourite artist, or anyone else who might enjoy it. For more info and updates, visit ourdrummersmusicians.com. See you next time.